I recently purchased a small metal cutting bandsaw. Did a bit of research online beforehand. Found bits and pieces of information about this saw, but not a lot. So I thought I'd do a quick review of it, if in case anybody else finds it useful. Been using it on and off for about a month now. I bought it for a specific project. I had, up until recently, been using one of these Evolution saws with the multi-material blade, the one that can cut metal, plastics, wood and things like that. It's been okay. Never particularly enjoyed using it for cutting steel. It always seemed very brutal to be cutting bits of steel with it. Lots of hot chips flying around. Okay, and aluminium, but you know, I avoided using it to cut steel. And the project I had come up called for me to be cutting up some 100 by 25 solid steel bar stock like this into chunks. I tried using this the Evolution saw for the first cut, and it was horrible. So I had previously retired this to a wood cutting saw. I'd put a fine tooth cross-cut blade in it for wood, and I've since put that blade back in again and won't be using it for cutting steel. So went and had a look for the cheapest bandsaw I could find, the Sheppach MBS1100. So I picked this particular saw because it was relatively inexpensive and available. I could order it and get it within a couple of days for a price that I was prepared to pay. It was bought for a specific project, and so I didn't want to spend a huge amount of money. I had previously been making do with an angle grinder, a hacksaw, and when need arose, the Evolution saw with the multi-material cutting blade in it. But now I've got this and I've used it a fair amount over the last 2 months. I'm definitely keeping it. I did for a while think that I might sell it. Space in my shed is at a premium. It's not very big and I've already got enough stuff in here, but now I have it and I've used it, I have no intention of getting rid of it. This saw has a cut capacity of about 125 millimeters or so, by a cut depth of 100. It comes on this pivoting base plate. You can take it off. You can undo the 3 bolts here that hold it onto this arm, and you can take it off and use it as a handheld bandsaw, or I suppose you could make a frame to hold it upright and turn it into an upright bandsaw. I've seen lots of videos on YouTube where people have taken these portable bandsaws and made some kind of upright bandsaw arrangement. In terms of the features we have available, they're pretty self-explanatory. We have a moving clamp where we can place pieces of material in and then clamp them in position. Something I have found with the clamp is that you want to make sure if you push the clamp right up to the stock and pull the handle, it sort of gets to the top and gets stuck and won't lock into position. So you need to leave a small gap between the moving jaw and the workpiece, and then when you pull the handle into place, it locks. Another feature we have here is the nut at the back, which is used to adjust the tension on the thrust bearing here on the pivot arm. When it arrived, I'm not sure whether it's supposed to be like this. I guess it is, because of the trigger arrangement, which we'll talk about in a sec, but that was done up tight enough that at any point over the travel of the saw, at any position, the saw would stay put and hold into position. Now, that's all well and good, but if you are cutting a big piece of steel like this, you know, it might take 5 minutes to make the cut. It's not exactly fast, but it does create a fantastically nice clean cut. Very little mess or noise compared to an angle grinder or one of the dry cut saws with a multi-material blade in it. But what I wanted to be able to do is not have to stand here and hold the trigger and also put downward pressure on the blade myself. I wanted to, you know, like the big bandsaws, you press the go button and walk away and it does it all for it. So you can adjust the preload on this nut, and you sort of hit the sweet spot, but whereby when it's at a high enough angle, it'll stay put in position that you leave it in, but when you bring it down and start initiating into a cut like this, it will fall under its own weight, and so it'll self-feed. by default the trigger doesn't lock on, so that sort of goes with the original setup whereby the saw wouldn't fall under its own weight. I think you're expected to sit here, hold the trigger in, and also apply that downward force to the saw. But you know, I didn't want to have to stand here for 5 minutes holding and putting pressure on the blade whilst making a big cut like this bit of steel. So I've just zip tied the trigger in the on position, and then with the adjustment on the tension of the saw, I can set it down on the workpiece, turn it on, and then it will feed under its own power. I don't have to stand here, or feed under its own weight. I don't have to stand here and hold it. And a speed control for cutting steel, I found that leaving it on number 1 is fine. You could probably set it on a higher number, but of course the faster the blade runs, the more heat you're going to generate, potentially the shorter the life of the blade. So I've left it on 1, and again, if I've got to cut a big block, I turn it on, feeds under its own weight, I can go off and do something else completely, and then come back to it when it's finished. For turning it on and leaving it to do its own thing, you could just plug it into the wall and then turn the thing on and off at the plug, but I happen to have one of these control boxes, so you've got a power plug on one end, and then you plug your tool into the other side of it, and then you can turn the tool on or off. Around the back here we have the angle adjustment, so you've got a locking lever here. It's one of these things that lifts up, cams around and goes back down again, so you can slacken off the holding bolt. Now there's no detents, it's just got a scale marked into the base and a little arrow on here, so you have to manually, it won't automatically stop at 0 or 45 degrees. You have to line it up. Now I don't mind that, because in my experience with inexpensive tools, the one thing they nearly always fail to get right is the detents or the static positions on the angle gauge. It might have divisions at 0.1 degree or 1 degree or something like that, but they're never particularly accurate. And if you've got fixed detents in certain positions, if they're not machined or cast in the right spot, then it's always going to cause you problems, because you're always going to fall into that detent if you're trying to hit a perfect angle. So in this case, I'm actually not bothered at all that there are no alignment options. You just have to do it by eye, because with a small engineering square or an angle gauge or an angle finder or something like that, you can measure it between the blade and the fence, and you can get your angle spot on. And I found using a small engineer's square against the fence and holding it against the side of the blade, I can get pretty well perfectly square cuts with it. And of course that's the big question that needs addressing, answering or asking is, does it cut square? That's if you've got a saw that doesn't cut straight or square, then what it's not a lot of use really. and this was some 35mm diameter stainless steel pipe. So in summary, I'm very pleased with this. I had previously tried to purchase a Parkside bandsaw, what appeared to be exactly the same unit. I purchased one, I think it was about a year ago, from my local Lidl on a middle of the Lidl special for £100. It was £99.99. But I'm not entirely sure what the issue was. But you couldn't tighten the blade properly, so the blade tightening handle, you spin it round and lock it into position, but the blade wasn't tight, and so the blade would wander and slip and all sorts. It just didn't work. Now, I don't know whether that was a problem, a manufacturing defect with the saws themselves, or whether that was perhaps been supplied with slightly the wrong blade. Maybe the blade was 10mm too long or something silly like that, and so the blade tension adjustment wouldn't tighten properly. I don't know what it was, but I got that one home, tried it, didn't work, took it back to shop. They gave me a refund, and the store manager actually let me have a look at another one. I opened it in the shop and found exactly the same problem. You couldn't tighten the blade properly with the blade handle, or the tightening knob. So that was a bust, and I didn't. That was very much an off the cuff sort of whim purchase, and since then I hadn't really thought about it again. But as I say, I needed this for a project. Now, the Parkside saw, when I tried to pick it up, was £100. This I paid £230. And I think as I understand it, these used to be about £130 to £150 a couple of years ago. But as with everything at the moment, the price has gone up, and I paid £230. I would have preferred to pay £130, but as it stands, I actually don't mind the fact I paid £230 for it. I needed it for a specific project. It absolutely did what I needed it to. Very happy, no complaints, cut square, does everything I want it to do. And so whilst potentially I might have paid £100 then more than if I'd bought it a year ago or 2 years ago, I'm not disappointed. I'm quite happy with the price I paid and the performance I get out of it. So somewhere after all of that, I'm pleased, I'm happy. I think it's a good saw. There are a few little foibles you've got to work around, like the sort of blade angle, not having any detents. You've got to set it manually, and the locking mechanism on the clamp needing just a little bit of fiddling to get it in the right position so it locks properly. But both of those two things are easy workarounds. They're absolutely not a deal breaker, and functionally the saw performs, in my opinion, very well.